Vietnam isn't dominating headlines. It isn't being framed as Asia's next giant. And yet, multinational corporations are quietly redesigning their future around it. Ports are expanding, industrial zones are filling, trade routes are recalibrating. This isn't hype, it's strategic repositioning. And if that shift continues, the balance of economic power in Asia may not look the way most analysts expect. The number already hints at it. An economy that once rebuilt from rubble is now growing at 8.02% and openly targeting 10% this year. That's not incremental, that's acceleration. And acceleration at this scale doesn't happen by accident. So how did Vietnam get here? It started when supply chains cracked. Between 2018 and 2020, tariffs spiked, trade tensions escalated, and the pandemic hit. Boardrooms across the globe began asking the same quiet question. What if one factory base isn't enough? The shift wasn't public, it was procedural. Diversify, de-risk, build redundancy, and slowly, production lines began moving, not away, but outward. Vietnam became the hedge, not replacing China, balancing it. And Vietnam offered something compelling: political stability, pro-business reforms, access to key shipping lanes, a young, disciplined workforce, and crucially, an open door to foreign direct investment. By October 2025, implemented FDI had grown nearly 9% year over year. That's not speculative capital. That's factories being built, equipment installed, payrolls expanding. Exports surged 17% in 2025 to $475 billion. Shipments to the United States alone hit a record $153 billion. That's not marginal participation in global trade. That's central positioning. But timing alone doesn't create an economic powerhouse. Plenty of countries have low labor costs. Plenty sit near shipping routes. Plenty sign trade agreements. Very few convert opportunity into sustained momentum. Vietnam did. The industrial and construction sector grew by 8.95% in 2025. Industrial zones expanded faster than infrastructure planners initially anticipated. Electronics assembly lines multiplied. Textiles and footwear scaled aggressively. And yet, this wasn't just a story of cheap labor capturing overflow production, because something more deliberate was happening beneath the surface. Vietnam wasn't trying to mirror China's scale. It was carving a complementary role, a manufacturing ecosystem agile enough to absorb redirected demand, but structured enough to climb the value chain. The service sector contributed over 51% to overall growth. That matters. It signals balance. It signals domestic consumption rising alongside exports. It signals a maturing economy, not just an export machine. GDP per capita crossed $5,000, pushing Vietnam toward upper middle income status. That's a psychological threshold as much as an economic one. It changes expectations. It changes internal demand. It changes the government's ambition. And the ambition is explicit: a $1 trillion economy by 2030 to 2035. For context, Vietnam's GDP reached roughly $514 billion in 2025. Doubling that within a decade requires sustained high growth, disciplined reform, and relentless competitiveness. The government isn't shy about the target. It's aligning policy around it. Infrastructure expansion, port upgrades, highway corridors linking industrial zones to shipping hubs, digital transformation initiatives, green economy investments, financial sector reform. Because growth at 8% is impressive, growth at 10% in a fragmented global economy is something else entirely. But this is where the tension rises. The world Vietnam is rising into isn't the world that lifted previous Asian miracles. Global trade is more politicized. Tariffs can return overnight. Supply chains are scrutinized through a geopolitical lens. Inflationary pressures ripple across borders. Non-performing loans in emerging markets can quietly destabilize progress. Vietnam faces its own constraints: infrastructure bottlenecks, financial sector supervision gaps, exposure to global demand cycles, the risk of overheating. Inflation in 2025 remained contained at 3.31%, within government targets. That's disciplined management. But maintaining that balance while pushing for 10% growth requires precision. Too much credit expansion and you risk asset bubbles. Too little and momentum slows. Too much dependence on foreign capital and external shock hits harder. Too little openness, and you lose competitiveness. This is not a frictionless ascent, it's a calculated climb. And here's where the story shifts. Vietnam is no longer just absorbing factories, it's upgrading them. Electronics assembly is expanding into more sophisticated components. Industrial parks are integrating research facilities. The digital economy is scaling through fintech, e-commerce, and software services. This is the quiet upgrade, not headline-grabbing innovation hubs overnight, not overnight unicorn explosions, but incremental, disciplined movement up the value chain. From labor-intensive assembly to higher-value manufacturing, from some contractor to strategic partner, the government is actively encouraging this transition, prioritizing technology, digital transformation, and green initiatives as the next growth engines. That's not accidental phrasing, because the next phase isn't about being the cheapest, it's about being indispensable, and indispensability changes bargaining power. When exports hit $475 billion and climb, when U.S. imports from your country reach record highs, when multinational corporations build not just plants, but supply chain ecosystems, you're no longer just participating, you're embedded. Vietnam's geography amplifies that embedment. Situated along major maritime routes in Southeast Asia, integrated deeply into regional supply chains, and tied into multiple trade agreements, it sits at a crossroads of Asian commerce. But geography alone doesn't generate 8% growth. Policy does. For years, Vietnam pursued gradual liberalization, trade integration, and private sector strengthening. It didn't abandon state guidance, but it didn't suffocate enterprise either. It learned from others' mistakes. Overheating property markets, debt-fueled infrastructure sprees, overdependence on a single export partner. Vietnam's model isn't perfect, risks remain real. Rising non-performing loans could pressure banks. Global demand shocks could hit exports. Protectionist waves could disrupt trade flows. But the trajectory is unmistakable. And here's the real question. Is Vietnam just benefiting from China's repositioning? Or is it building something structurally durable? Because replacing one node in the global supply chain doesn't make you a powerhouse. Becoming central to the network does. The evidence suggests Vietnam understands this distinction. It's not framing itself as the next China. It's positioning itself as a strategic complement in a diversified world. Companies don't want one factory anymore. They want a network. And Vietnam is rapidly becoming a core node in that network. Domestic consumption is rising alongside exports, creating internal demand buffers. Services are expanding, not shrinking. Technology adoption is accelerating. Education investment is rising to support more sophisticated industry. This is what separates a temporary surge from a structural shift. The ambition to become a $1 trillion economy isn't rhetorical. It's a signal of intent. And if growth sustains near current levels, that threshold isn't fantasy, it's arithmetic. But arithmetic alone doesn't capture influence. Influence comes from dependency, from supply chains routed through your ports, from production timelines that hinge on your industrial zones, from trade volumes that tie major economies to your output. And that's the shift happening quietly. Vietnam isn't exploding into the headlines, it's integrating into systems. While global narratives debate superpower rivalry, Vietnam is executing a different strategy. Embed, upgrade, diversify. That's why exports surged even among volatility. That's why foreign investment keeps flowing. That's why inflation remains controlled while growth accelerates. This is not noise, it's discipline. And discipline, over time, compounds. So while analysts focus on Asia's giants, they may be overlooking the country quietly stitching itself into the region's economic fabric. This isn't just speed. Plenty of economies grow fast. The difference is positioning. Vietnam now sits at the intersection of three converging forces: global supply chain diversification, deep trade integration, and demographic momentum. It didn't wait for the spotlight. It built the foundation while attention was elsewhere. And now, as companies quietly redesign their manufacturing maps, Vietnam is already there. Ports expanded, factories operational, policies aligned. If this trajectory holds, if reforms continue, infrastructure scales, and financial risks stay contained, the next decade in Asia won't just be about China's recalibration or India's ascent. It may revolve around the country that moved methodically while others argued loudly. Not replacing, not competing head-on, becoming indispensable. Vietnam, quietly, becoming Asia's next economic powerhouse. If this changed how you see Asia's economic map, like and subscribe. And if you're ready to see what comes next in this global game, click the video on your screen.